Welcome back to week 3 of the Great British Bake Off. This week is bread week, so let's take a look at what we're going to make in this week's technical challenge.
Paul would like you each to make a dozen identical Pain Aux Raisins.
Okay, so this is something I've never actually eaten or made before, so I'm really excited to try this challenge. Let's dive in and take a look at the process. So let's start off with making the enriched dough for the Pain Aux Raisins, and if you've ever made cinnamon rolls before, you're going to recognize this method straight away. I'm starting by rubbing the butter, which is plant-based, and also some flour together to a sort of breadcrumb consistency. Then we add some caster sugar, yeast and salt to it and just stir all of that together until everything is combined. Next, we're going to add some warm water, some plant-based milk and 1 egg together. Give those a bit of a stir and we're going to add that to the flour mixture. Now this is going to help to bring everything together, and you could do this a couple of ways now. We're going to have to bring it together and you can either knead it, do it with a wooden spoon, or I actually chose to do it in my stand mixer just because my shoulder isn't good enough to actually knead things for a very long time anymore. So I find that the dough hook with the stand mixer works perfectly well whenever you're doing something like this, because you can obviously leave it and then come back to it when it's ready. But this does come together fairly quickly. I think you need to knead it probably for about 5 minutes, and then when it's done, you're going to pop it onto a surface like so. Now bear in mind, it looks sticky, and quite honestly it was really sticky. My first takeaway for this recipe was that I found that you actually did need to add more flour to it, because that dough was just far too soft for my liking and it made just a huge mess everywhere. More of it seemed to be sticking to me than actually coming together, so I did need to add a little bit flour every so often just to get that dough to come together to a workable dough that we could actually do something with. So once it did come together, the next thing that you're going to do then is actually wrap it up, as we need to let that dough chill for a little bit in the fridge. So what you can do, grab some plastic wrap or cling film and then roll it into that, just into a rough shape. Don't worry at this stage if it is still a little bit sticky. The resting period in the fridge will actually help that as the gluten develops, and then we're going to pop it in there for about 1 hour. Next, it's time to start making our creme pat, also known as creme patisserie, and this is really easy to make. You want to start off by adding into a bowl some sugar and some egg yolks, then also some corn flour and a little bit of milk as well, and then just use a hand mixer, or again you could do this by hand, until everything is really nice and pale and creamy like you can see here. This came together in no time at all, and creme pat is such an easy recipe. I know that some people might be afraid to try making it, but it's really easy to make it dairy free as well if you just use plant-based milk instead of regular dairy milk. Now into a saucepan we're adding the rest of the plant-based milk and some vanilla bean paste, or you could use vanilla pods as they suggest in the recipe. Once that is warm, you're going to add it to the mixture that we previously made and continuously stir it. Now this bit is super important because those eggs are going to curdle, otherwise you're just going to end up with scrambled eggs, which we definitely don't want. Pop all of that back into your saucepan and then keep stirring it again until it forms a really nice thick custard. And you can see here it's starting to thicken up nicely for us already. And once that's done, we're going to take it off of the heat. We're going to transfer it into another bowl like so. You can see how nice and silky smooth that looks as well. And then this is going to need to cool as well. So once it's in the bowl, what we're going to do is pop a little bit of plastic wrap on top of it. And that is also going to have to sit and cool down at room temperature for a little while. And then we'll actually pop it in the fridge as well. So those are the two main stages for the Pain Aux Raisins that you need to do in advance. Now we're going to move on to something which I really enjoy doing, and this is a vital stage for the lamination whenever you make dough. the first thing you have to do is take your block of butter, which is still hard at this stage, and actually beat it and roll it until you get a nice flat surface on it. I actually really enjoyed this process. I have never done it before, and what I did find was that you can be really forgiving with yourself if you're not getting the right shape that you need when you're rolling this out. And as you can see, I'm just kind of measuring it every so often, trimming bits off and adding them onto the areas where I need it so that I can get the size that I need. And for this, what we actually want is a piece of butter that ends up being about 33 by 19 centimeters. That goes back in the fridge to chill, and now we can start working on our dough again. So now I'm just quickly kneading it on my surface just to give it a couple of turns, and the flour will actually help to make sure that it doesn't stick to the rolling pin as well. And for this one, this is where we need to roll out to particular sizes as well. Now, if you are wanting to try to recreate this, make sure you check out the links in the description below where I'll share Paul Hollywood's recipe and also my amended version as well, with just some of the hints and tips that I picked up from taking part in this challenge this week. Okay, so that dough is coming together nicely. The next bit we're going to do is add that slab of butter to it. Now remember, our butter is really hard, so be careful when you take it off of the parchment paper. Then we're going to start folding everything together. So you take a third and fold it over. Then the other third you're going to take, fold that over so the seam is pretty much to the other side. Then we're going to go ahead and just kind of tidy up those edges because we want to seal in that butter as well when we eventually bake with it later. Then we're going to go and wrap it up in plastic wrap and pop it back in the fridge for about 20 minutes. And it does take a little bit of time to make laminated dough as well. So once that stage is done, you have to bring it out of the fridge and do the whole process again. So essentially that process of making lamination is where we're having layers of dough and layers of butter, which when they bake will create all those really nice pillowy layers that you may have had in croissants before, and if you've had any type of pastry like this as well. Let me know in the comments below if you've ever had a go at lamination. Like I said at the start, this is my very first time, and I found the whole process really fascinating, and just to see how that butter and dough worked together every time we were rolling it was just really fascinating to me. So I've just rolled it up again. We're going to pop it back in the plastic wrap and then in the fridge again for another 20 minutes. So this time we're going to do one last roll with it as we did before, which you can see here. Now we're going to roll it out again into a square, which is going to be about 30 centimeters. Don't stress too much about the size either. You want to be roughly in that ballpark. It doesn't matter though if it's not perfectly square. This is baking at the end of the day and it's still going to look great and taste great anyway. So just try and keep it as even as you can. There we go. So now we can start actually building with the filling. So the first thing we're going to do is spread all of that lovely creme pat on top of our dough like so. I found it really useful to do that with a cranked spatula as well, just so that I could spread it out a lot easier, and make sure that you do it quite evenly too. You don't want extra parts being a little thicker than others, so try and make sure it's spread really evenly when you do this. Then to that we're going to add our raisins. You could use currants instead, whatever you have to hand. And finally, we are adding some orange zest. And some cinnamon as well, just to give it that extra flavour. Now the fun bit, as again I've said before, if you've ever made cinnamon rolls, this bit is going to seem like a piece of cake to you. It's essentially the same thing. And what I did notice, as you see here, is some of that filling did actually spill out when I rolled it up, so you can just wipe that off and clean it off. We don't want to have too much of that on the outside of the roll when we cut everything. Clean up those edges then, tuck over the seam as well, and now we can go ahead and start portioning it out. Now, like they said at the start of the challenge, we want to end up with 12 of these of a similar size. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, I always find that a little bit challenging because the end pieces always seem to be a little bit smaller than the rest. But quite honestly, I don't stress too much about it. They're still going to look good when they've baked. So you're going to start to add those to some lined baking sheets as well. Make sure you evenly space them because they will actually spread a little bit as they bake. There we've got our first 6 on there. I'm just going to clean up some of that filling that has seeped out as well. And they look kind of similar in size, but we'll see what they look like a little bit later. Then I'm just going to go ahead and cut up the last 6. Now you'll notice that I'm also tidying up the ends of that, as they mentioned in the challenge that they don't really want any tails appearing on the pain au raisin once they bake. So you want to just try and tuck that little last cut piece of dough so that it is tucked underneath while it bakes. Okay, so we'll just get that cleaned up. You can see 6 of them here looking great. I'm going to let them proof for an hour in a warm area just to rise a little bit. And then we will finally be ready to bake. So I've preheated my oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm just giving them a quick egg wash as well before they go in, as that's going to help them brown up nicely and also make them a little bit sort of crispy on the outside as well. And then we're going to bake them for around 20 minutes. And when they come out of the oven, this is what they look like. You can see that they have grown quite significantly. We do have a little bit of a tail going on there as well. And one tip I would say is that the recipe does suggest that you add a little bit of foil over to stop them browning too much, and they come out beautifully. Then we just want to let them cool a little bit, and whilst they're doing that, we're going to go ahead and make our icing for them, which is a basic icing recipe of icing sugar and some orange juice. So as you can imagine, that's going to really add another nice flavor combination to the pain au raisin and just lift them up a little bit and give them some extra sweetness as well. So I'm just mixing all of that together in a bowl like so. You can see this is a little bit thick, so I'm probably going to add a little bit more orange juice to it to thin it down. You want this to be at a slightly pipeable stage as well. If it's too runny, obviously it's going to run right off the sides of them. So just add a little bit extra at a time until you get a nice pipeable consistency. And I think that looks much better. So now we can pop it into a tipless piping bag. I'm just going to pour all of that into there. Now you can see I've got my piping bag into a tumbler as well. That just makes it a lot easier to fill the bag up. And then I just pull my spoon out, tie off the end of that bag so that the icing doesn't come out the wrong end. And we're going to be ready to finish off our pain au raisin. Okay, and then it's as simple as cutting the end off the piping bag and then just giving a drizzle of icing all the way back and forth on all of these to finish them off. And I think this really does finish them off nicely too. Okay, so our pain au raisin are done. Let's take a good close-up look at it. So they turned out pretty good actually for something that I've never made before and my first time doing any sort of laminated dough. I'm actually kind of impressed with them. Let's take a look at the back as well, because you can see all that detail there. They're nice and shiny and a really good size too. The icing looks great on them. So one thing I would say before I actually try them is that this recipe actually took me a lot longer than the bakers were given in the tent. So I kind of feel like there's some kind of TV trickery going on in the show. Anyway, let's go ahead and see what they taste like. It's really, really good actually. So again, I haven't tried one of these, so I wasn't too sure what it would be like, but that icing on top is really nice. It complements the flavor of the pastry. You've got that nice sort of texture inside as well, which is what you would expect in something like this. So actually, I am pretty impressed. I think even though this technically isn't a bread recipe, I think it would be classed more as like a patisserie. I'm going to give it 8 out of 10. So if you do want to make these, make sure you check out the link in the description below for the original recipe that they used in the tent. and my modified version as well. Bear in mind, like I say, they took a lot longer to make than they actually had in the tent, but I think they're well worth it. Definitely something that we would make again and maybe play around with the flavors too. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.